Hi, I'm Ungar-Sargon, and this is my proposition guide for the November 2018 election in California. Living in California is expensive. Monthly rent costs 50% more than in the rest of the country, and the average California home costs 2.5 times the national average. In addition to being a burden on Californians, these factors have contributed to the rising numbers of homeless people in the state. Proposition 1 authorizes the state to borrow $4 billion in bonds for housing programs. More than half of that money would go to build affordable multifamily housing, and the rest would be used for infrastructure programs, down payment assistance, a farm worker housing program, and a veterans home loan program. More than 130,000 people are homeless in the state of California, and an estimated 1/3 of those people suffer from mental illness. In 2004, Prop 63 was passed, which raised taxes on those earning over $1 million a year to fund mental health services. In 2016, the No Place Like Home Act was passed to rehabilitate and build housing for homeless people with mental illness, but there was a lawsuit that sought to stop the use of Prop 63 taxes for No Place Like Home building. While that lawsuit is pending, No Place Like Home construction is on hold. Proposition 2 asks voters to authorize the state to borrow $2 billion in bonds to finance the No Place Like Home program and use up to $140 million a year from the Prop 63 millionaires' money to repay the debt. 88% of California is still technically in a drought. Most of the spending on water in the state of California is done by local governments who spend $25 billion a year on water-related expenses that come out of our water and sewage bills. But the state does give grants and loans to local government agencies. In June, voters in California passed a proposition that allowed the government to borrow $4 billion in bonds for water projects. Proposition 3 asks voters to authorize the state to borrow an additional $8.8 billion in bonds to further ensure clean drinking water, the protection of watersheds, capture of stormwater, and recycling of wastewater. It also includes more than $1 billion to increase the canal capacities and strengthen dams across the state. Children's hospitals in California receive most of their funding from Medi-Cal, but this isn't enough to cover all the costs of care. To make up the difference and to keep up with earthquake codes, these hospitals are asking for taxpayers in California to help close the gap. Proposition 4 asks voters to authorize the state to borrow $1.5 billion in bonds to fund construction, expansion, renovation, and equipment for 8 private nonprofit hospitals and 5 UC hospitals. Property tax in California is a little peculiar. If you're a homeowner, the current value of your house doesn't determine your property tax. Instead, it's how long you've owned your house. This is because according to California law, property tax is 1.1% of sale value adjusted for inflation by 2% a year. Because real estate appreciates at much more than 2% a year, people who have had their homes longer end up paying less in property tax. This also means that people who have had a home for a long time and want to move are potentially looking at a massive tax increase. Proposition 5 seeks to make it easier for older homeowners to move. It proposes that they be able to move anywhere in the state while transferring the taxable value of their existing home. It seeks to allow eligible homeowners to transfer the taxable value of their existing home to a more expensive home with some adjustment, and it reduces the taxes of eligible homeowners on newly purchased homes that are less expensive than their old homes. Transportation funding in California comes to $35 billion a year, of which $16 billion comes from local government, 12 from state, and 7 from federal sources. The state funding comes from state fuel and vehicle taxes, and in 2017, legislators boosted these taxes by 75% to improve the quality of roads and bridges in the state. Proposition 6 seeks to roll back these increases in gas and vehicle taxes and also requires any future increase to be approved by voters. Due to the Earth's axial tilt, as you move away from the equator, there's more daylight hours in the summer and fewer daylight hours in the winter. 70 years ago, in 1949, California voted to institute daylight savings time, which seeks to redress these discrepancies by moving the clock forward an hour in the spring and back an hour in the fall. Proposition 7 seeks to give the legislature the ability to eliminate the time change and establish year-round daylight savings time. Kidneys are the organs responsible for filtering blood and producing urine. When a person's kidneys stop functioning, unless they receive a transplant, they need to artificially filter their blood through a process called dialysis multiple times every week to continue living. In California, there are 588 licensed dialysis clinics that treat 80,000 patients each month. Most of these clinics are owned and operated for profit by two companies, DaVita and Fresenius. The majority of people who attend these clinics pay for their dialysis through Medicare. The remaining patients pay through group or individual insurance, and the clinics charge these insurance companies at much higher rates than they charge the government-run insurers. Proposition 8 seeks to place a 15% cap on how much the clinics can charge private or group insurance companies over their operating expenses. In California, we typically pay 50% more in rent than other states because there isn't enough housing for everyone who wants to live here. About 20% of us live in cities that limit how much landlords can increase rent from one year to the next, which is called rent control. But back in '95, a law known as Costa-Hawkins was passed, which limited rent control in three ways. It couldn't apply to any building that went up after February 1, '95, couldn't apply to single-family homes, and it couldn't dictate what a landlord charges a new renter when they move in. Proposition 10 seeks to repeal Costa-Hawkins and allow individual cities to enforce rent control as they see fit. In 2016, the California Supreme Court ruled in Augustus V ABM that employers must provide breaks that are off-duty and non-interruptible even in emergencies. The private ambulance industry, which provides 75% of emergency rides in the state, worry that it's only a matter of time before the courts rule on breaks for their employees. Proposition 11 requires that ambulance employees remain on call during work breaks. Animal cruelty is against the law in the state of California. In 2008, Prop 2 created standards for housing certain farm animals. It prohibited California farmers from housing these animals in cages or crates that don't allow them to turn around, lie down, stand up, or fully extend their limbs. Proposition 12 seeks to put more precise size requirements on the farmers raising these animals. The requirements for pigs would be 24 square feet, for calves 43 square feet, and for hens 1 square foot, with an eye to have all hens cage-free by 2022. It would also make it so that all food products sold in California would have to come from animals raised according to these guidelines. So that's it, folks. I hope you found this information useful. And for the love of all that is good, please, please go out and vote. We need some real change in this country.